So a lot of discoveries, a lot of work, a lot of new things, a lot of unanticipated issues to deal with, in particular the pandemic. Obviously, this was not planned when I accepted to take on this job. So hectic, great, because I love to discover, to get into new experiences. So I've been definitely having those. On the whole, extremely positive. Very happy to be here.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so how do you feel about this start, but also kind of this new start with the Projet Collectif that you've kicked off?
So, it happens that the Graduate Institute is at a double turning point. It's at a turning point because it changed director. Previous director, Philippe Burin, was here for 16 years, which is really a long time. And, I'm coming in, a very different person. I'm French first. I'm not Swiss. I'm a woman. I'm a political scientist / sociologist. I'm not a historian like he was. So many different things. So, different generation also, obviously. And so we are, that's a new turn for the Institute. And the world is changing at the same time that the Institute is changing its director. The world around the Institute is changing. That the Institute is studying the world, it's studying the global world, and the global world is particularly changing in many different ways. So there's kind of a profound shift in that world, and therefore also there should be a shift in the self-definition of the Institute and what its role is, what its projection of its future specific identity should be. The world of higher education beyond this is also changing. We've had to digitalize ourselves in a record few weeks. And even if we all hope that we can go back to the classroom in more physical kinds of forms, we have to admit that this digitalization is going to be here to stay for quite a while. So how do we turn actually what was a bit imposed on us by constraint by the changes of the time into a great opportunity where we can do things that we thought we could do, but we never made it because there was too many difficulties, obstacles, investments of different kinds to move in that direction. Now we were forced to do that. And so how do we turn all this into an opportunity for the next stage of higher education? But still claiming what is specific about university life, university exchanges, university debates, and that you certainly cannot replicate in purely virtual context and virtual settings.
Thank you. So I think we can now move to the crux of this discussion. We're on the last day of the Gender and Diversity Month, hosted by the student community here at the Institute and a variety of other members of faculty and staff. And really, we know that you've been a visiting professor at the Institute for the last few years, and that your research interests focus on the sociological approaches to understand the complex interactions between business and society. Somewhat we're in one, and you've complemented this with leadership and teaching skills with regards to organizations, management, leadership, responsibility, etc. How do you feel like these academic perspectives have contributed to your career journey? And if so, how will these perspectives contribute to the Institute's vision and leadership in terms of gender and diversity?
So, I guess I let myself being driven by what interests me, by questions. And that's often something that I actually have advised my own PhD students, is that if you're going to be a scholar, you'd better be working on things that are interesting you in the deepest sense of the term, that you really are wondering about. You're wondering about why certain things are certain ways. Well, that's what you should be studying, and not simply studying things because either they are sure to land you a job, or because your PhD supervisor decides that this is an interesting topic, or because you have access to a great database and that allows you to explore this particular topic. So question-driven, I've always been very much interested by the way in which we shape our economies is having an impact on who we are as individuals. In the deepest sense of the word, this is really what is interesting me. How do we get transformed ourselves, as human beings, in terms of who we are, in terms of how do we relate to each other, in terms of how do we relate to nature, how do we relate to other species, does this all get shaped, transformed by our economic arrangements? And how can we in turn then rethink maybe those economic arrangements so that we can reinvent new connections to ourselves, new connections to others, to Earth, to other species, to our environment. So I guess, in the broad sense of the term, everything I've done so far has been useful because it has led me to who I am and to a particular way to ask big questions, questions that in fact turn out to be very relevant today. When I started, it was not so clear that those questions were relevant because we were not questioning. We were, taking the world as it was, and the world as it was supposed to be the best world there was. I started my PhD at the end of the 80s, so this was like the time when capitalist economy was completely winning all over the place, and then there was really no questioning of the fact that the market was the right way to go. It happens that today, all those questions that I really started exploring back then are at the core of our own self-questioning at the global level. I think this is really what it's all about. It's what kind of world after, le monde d'après, what will it look like? And a lot of this will have to be connected to a particular socioeconomic system that comes together, obviously, with particular political arrangements. And this has obviously to be looked at the transnational level, because we cannot think any of those things anymore only at the national level. So in a sense, all those, all my work as a scholar has led me to where I am, to be here in the position of at the head of the Institute at this time where I think that the Institute has never been as relevant as it will be in the coming years, because it is very well placed to address those questions in such a kind of total way. I like to use the notion by Marcel Mauss, the total social fact notion, and to underscoring the fact that all the situations that we look at can be looked at as complete situations, or economic, political, social, ethical, environmental, even religious, and in a sense cultural, all together and all at the same time. And I think that the Institute is particularly well placed to do this. This is a way that I've always been thinking. So yes, I think that what I've worked on is helping me today where I am as directrice of the Institute.
Thank you. So, Marila, successful female leaders and businesswomen, they're often seen as being aggressive, and they're just simply being assertive. And they get asked how they balance private life and work life when men in similar positions don't. So, how have you managed to deal with this?
This is a complex question. First, there are many different questions in that one question. So I'll start first with the notion of aggressivity, and then I'll go on to the private life, work-life balance. On the being aggressive versus assertive, I guess I'm pretty sure many people, not only men, but women too, have felt along the years that at sometimes, some moments, I would be a bit assertive and probably aggressive. I'm sure you can find a lot of people who will say that. I think that on the whole, people have probably not defined me uniquely that way. They've acknowledged that at some moments I could be that way, but they haven't identified me as aggressive or assertive, because that's my explanation. Maybe I'm totally wrong, but I think that one explanation is that my approach to management, my approach to dealing with others has been to maximize the time that I give to listening, to questioning, to actually taking the time maybe to contradict myself, okay, to actually sometimes change my mind also. And so being participative in the way in which I'm setting the stage, in a sense, has been a systematic manner in which I've worked. And people have acknowledged that. But then there's a point where you have to decide, when you're a manager, when you're running an organization or a part of an organization, or even a research group, which are different things that I've been running through time in my career. There's also moments where you need to take on the responsibility of saying, well, we are going to do this in the end. After all this discussion, trying obviously to move people as much as you can in the same direction, trying to create coherence, trying to create some common vision. But in the end, you do have to take a stand and move in one particular direction, and you're going to leave some people behind, obviously, in the sense that some people will not see what they wanted to put in the project, in that project. Even if you manage to really bring a lot of people along, you are going to always lose a bit. So it's in that moment that people will say, well, she's assertive or she's aggressive. And I guess the way in which you can compensate that, on the other hand, is by being systematically coherent also in the way in which you accept that there are moments where you have to make decisions as leaders or as decision makers, but also you have to then accept the responsibility that comes from that decision. And so if things go well, you share the very positive, developments that happened thanks to what was seen as a collective decision. And if things don't go well, then you should actually individually accept the responsibility for them not going well. And I think that's the way, but that takes time, in a sense that, if you do this only once, people might not notice that. But over time, then you get to be this kind of leader that is, yes, assertive, but not aggressive, in the sense that the assertion goes together with assumption of responsibility. And for me, this is really the necessary counterpart of assertion. And really, I'm going beyond women, men here. I think that leadership has to be responsible leadership in that sense also, that actually you are the leader and you have certain advantages of being a leader, but you also have certain costs that are associated with leadership, and the main cost should be the responsibility. So the decision is yours in the end, and I'm all for, and I try as much as I can to bring along people with me, and not to make single-handed decisions on my own, but to have really collective decision-making processes. But in the end, you have to assume that decision. You have to assume the responsibility for it, particularly when it doesn't work as well as you intended. If it works well, then you should, actually share it with everybody. That's the way. So that's the way I've been trying to function as a manager, which I think is a way to compensate for this assertion, aggressivity that you can find in almost all leaders. But obviously, there are a lot of variability in the way in which this assertion, aggressivity is being handled. There's also the very important need to be, as we say in French, bienveillant, which is very difficult to really give exactly the translation in English. But benevolent is not really the nice translation. Bienveillant goes really beyond and really actually looking at people for what they are, human beings with strengths, but also with, we all have our moments of weaknesses, we all have our difficulties, we all have our humanity. And so this should be really part of your, tool set as a leader when you are getting ready to take decisions, getting ready to take the responsibilities for them. So you have to balance, basically. That would be my answer. On the work-life balance, precisely, story. I had this very nice anecdote at some point when I became the dean of faculty at a previous school a long time ago. I was 35. I was the first female dean of faculty in that business school. Some of the faculty members who were there had been my professors long time before. And I was now going to be their dean, which is not exactly the same thing as a boss, but still there's a bit of this. I was in my personal life at that time going through a divorce, having two very small kids. So I was having to balance all those things at the same time. And the director of the school, one day we had lunch and he was talking to me about a colleague who was taking on the dean of study position, a very nice colleague that I really liked a lot, a man. And he was telling me, this director, this colleague, saying, well, this is great, he accepted to come and his wife is going to stop working so that he can fully dedicate himself to his job. And I couldn't believe that the guy was saying that to me without realizing he knew about my situation and without realizing what he was saying. So I looked at him for a few minutes and then I said to him, wow, now I know what I have to do. And he said, I was a bit surprised. He did not expect that and said, yeah, I have to find a wife. And he was actually totally taken aback. You have to remember that this was in the 95, so it was a long time ago. Oh, no, it was not 95, well, 2000, but still, long time ago. And so humor, that's, I think, a very powerful way to deal with this kinds of insensitivity on the complexity of personal, professional balancing act for women. And that's been true of all the women I've met, especially when you have kids. Balancing your personal and your professional life is always a challenge. On the other hand, you have to also acknowledge that if you manage to do it, it's also a very powerful source of strength, because as a mother, particularly as a mother, you need to be much more efficient. So when you're at work, you're very efficient. When you're at home, you're very efficient. And so in fact, you actually become exponentially much more efficient than your male colleague who has his wife at home taking care of this other side. So yes, humor, energy, sense of priorities also. So, there was also a few things that were clear when I got this first job as dean. I said, I will take my daughters to school in the morning. So no meetings before that time and no meeting after that time, because I need to go back and take over. Sense of priorities, a lot of humor. You have to have a sense of humor about yourself, about others, and you have to obviously have as much as you can a healthy kind of life. Keep moments for yourself, which in that period of my life was certainly not easy at all. And turn it into actually an advantage, because seriously, I think that this has been the time when I learned to be efficient. When I was trying to balance that.
Okay, I think you've touched on to a few points of the next questions that we need to address, but this is perfect because we can keep this going. Yeah. So one thing I'd like to touch on is specifically, the way that you were the first female dean at the school, and the professors in your faculty were your professors as a student, and the fact that, academia has often tended to be a very male-dominant industry. Even though at a junior researcher level, things have improved in terms of parity, we see that in terms of leadership at higher education institutions, this parity is not really kind of followed through all the way up, and that 21% of higher education institutions in Europe are actually led by women. What do you see as the biggest barriers to female leadership in higher education, and how did you navigate these barriers to get to where you're today, before even you were that first dean?
Yeah, I mean, and even I think the 21% is strongly biased by Nordic countries, which have this near parity, actually. So if you take the Nordic countries away, I think the figure is much lower, particularly in countries like France or Germany. I think that you would find really much lower numbers. So you're totally right. I mean, there's a complete imbalance, because if you look at the figures on students, university students today, and you see that at the institute, but you see it all over the place. Actually, on average, close to 60% of students in the world today are female. University students. Obviously, there are differences if you look at the math departments versus the language departments, for example, but still, on the whole, you still have a very vast majority of university students who are female. And when you reach, as you say, the ranks of leadership, then that becomes, in France, I think university leaders, it's about something like 7 or 8% of university leaders that are female. So the gap is still big. And, when I was young, people were saying, oh, don't worry, things will change, because, you have this kind of time gap, in a sense. So you will need to have this new generations of new generations where you have so many women in higher education, and then at some point it will be a natural one. Obviously, it doesn't happen that way. Why is it different in the Nordic countries? It's because they have a very active, politically driven parity system, where you really actually move towards parity at all levels, particularly in the public sector. And they've imposed this in a very systematic kind of manner. So I think it's obviously one way to go. So why doesn't it happen naturally? Why are there so many obstacles? Obviously not because of the competencies and the quality of women. I think that that's really certainly not a case. I think that obviously what I was telling you about this managing private and professional life is an issue all throughout, because in maybe, and I hope that this is changing in your generation, but including in my generation, which already was not my parents' generation or my grandparents' generation, but including in my generation, really the weight of taking care of the children was still very much on women and remained very much on women. So, I explained, I made it look really easy, this thing of balancing my personal and professional life, but no, it was not easy. And I'm pretty sure that for a number of women, this is an obstacle at some point, where you kind of give up a bit, at least for a while. And in our academic world, if you give up for a few years, even if you try to come back after that, then it actually is quite difficult. It's quite difficult to get back to, as a researcher, where you were, or where your male colleagues have gone in the meantime when you were not there. So I think that this is certainly an issue. And then you have really deep structures, in the sense that what I saw in the case of France, because that's the case I know best, is in the context of what we call the Grandes Écoles system, the French system, which is not the university, but the Grandes Écoles system. Basically, you had a market for leadership that was completely or nearly completely male dominated, and nobody would go out of this pool. You had this kind of like, pool that was circulating. The same people were going from one position to the next. When a position was getting open in HEC or Centrale or wherever, then you had the same kind, the same pool of men from which boards were drawing, without any imagination of trying to go and look for new people, and in particular for women. This is changing, okay? This in the last few years has been changing. You can also see, for example, the decision of the Conseil de Fondation of the Institute to go and find me as a clear case that this is changing, because normally I should not have been in that pool of people that such a Conseil should be looking at. So it is changing. It is changing slowly. And that's why Nordic countries have put in place much more structural transformation, imposing actually this parity system in all levels. And so it's really a question of being able to think out of the box. So you need to have new generations of board members. In fact, this is what you really need, where new generations of board members that see also the complexity of a particular period in which we are, and where traditional solutions and traditional leadership doesn't work anymore. Okay, and so that's when you can be ready to take the risks and maybe to go and find others, people who haven't had those kinds of positions so far. So that's my gut feeling on why it's taking so much time. And as you can see from what I'm saying, I'm actually very much in favor of the Nordic system. I think that for a while, at least, quotas or the equivalent of quotas are very necessary if you want to structurally change things. Once, after a while, you don't need them anymore, because things then actually get then you have a different pool of people, and from that different pool of people, you will have a more spontaneous and more balanced kind of choice. One thing, though, that I want to say as a little caveat to everything, because it's never been easy. It's not been easy at the beginning. Let me put it actually that way. It's not been easy at the beginning to be a woman and to try to make a career, not only as a researcher in the first place, but also as a manager in the education world. But the closer I get to now, to my age and to this stage in my career, and the easier it becomes. Also because the world is changing, and because indeed, even if you don't have quota systems or structural systems in place, people are much more sensitive. Everybody is becoming more sensitive about the fact that you need women in different positions. So when there are few women and everybody wants women in this position, things become easier for those women who have done well. Okay, you also have to not, to have a reputation that you've done relatively well in the previous positions where you were. If you're done unwell, then it's not going to work. But so to be a bit subtle about the fact that yes, for a while it was an obstacle to be a woman. It was difficult, more difficult for me as a woman than it would have been for a man. Now I think it's easier. It's easier for many, many different ways, for many different reasons.
Thank you for sharing your experiences, Marie-Laure. We have two questions from the audience. And the first one asks you for any funny stories about keeping a work-life balance that you'd like to share. And the second one asks you about what you would personally do at the Institute to make a step change towards gender and diversity.
Okay, funny story. Wow. Funny story. I'm not sure if I have a funny story, except for, the kind of thing that, in fact, a lot of women have gone through now because of COVID and because working from home. So when, you know that you have to run to get kids back from school, and then that you have a meeting on the phone that absolutely has to happen. So it has to happen after picking the girls from the school, and they are around, and they just want one thing, is to be with you, and they want your attention, and you are on the phone with an important meeting, and you're trying to make all those kind of weird gestures to your daughters, and trying to calm them at a distance. Another one, which I think is probably more funny, I told you about this boss of mine, which already was, quite a bit insensitive about this dimension. And at some point, he kept constantly calling me very late in the evening, which was really something that I wanted to stop. And at some point, he calls me, and my daughter was then 6 or 7 or something, picks up the phone. And when I understand right away that it's him, because I can hear his voice, from afar. And so I make those very big moves to her, saying, "I'm not here, I'm not here." And so she tells him, "Well, she's not here." And he's like, "What do you mean she's not here? So who is here?" "Well, nobody is here." And so, I was like in this kind of between a rock and a hard place, because on the one hand, I would appear this horrible mother who leaves her 2 young daughters alone at home. And on the other hand, I was like, I would have to talk to the guy. And so in the end, I did talk to the guy, and kind of, let my poor daughter go in a room, because I felt it was very unfair to her that she had to suffer this. So I guess that's the closest to funny I can get in terms of this work-life balance thing. What do I want to do? I guess I often say that we will have reached, I will measure success when we can be very comfortable about having, for example, on a panel 2 men. Because it happens that those 2 men are right now on that particular panel the right persons to be talking about that particular topic. And we can be very happy about this and very fine with this if, on the whole, we have what I call natural parity. Okay, if on the whole, we have this very soft and smooth mechanisms where we're more or less 50-50 in everything. Okay, we're not 50-50 in terms of our students, by the way, you have to remember. And that's actually something we have to be careful also about, because we don't want too much of an imbalance. But once we manage to have this natural stage of parity where it's not even thought about, in the sense that, yes, sure, naturally, when you're going to have a recruitment committee, more or less half of the committee is women, more or less half of the committee is men. And sometimes it happens that you have a bit more men, and sometimes you have a bit more women, and that's fine. But for example, I was sitting on this recruiting committee for another university very recently, and they wanted to recruit a woman, which was fine. This is really fine to have this desire to recruit a woman. But we had, we were reaching the the first selection process, so the short list of 8 persons, 8 candidates. And out of those 8 candidates, at the beginning of our discussions, we were going towards 8 women. And I told them I would feel very uncomfortable if we had 8 men. And I feel very uncomfortable if we have 8 women. And so this is what I'm trying to say, that how, for me, the moment where I can say we've succeeded is when we managed to reach that natural parity, when in fact gender doesn't become an issue anymore, in the sense that we are really looking for the quality of individuals, and the balancing out is an overall balancing out. It's not a systematic one. Well, it is a systematic one, but it sometimes, it will go one way or the other. And then, this is only the beginning, because obviously diversity is not only gender, okay? It goes well beyond it. And so this is only the beginning, and where we still have a lot of work to do at the Institute, and we know that is in terms of other diversities, particularly at the level of our faculty, a bit less at the level of our students, but still also at the level of our students, because some regions of the world are less represented than others. So there's all those other diversities, in which nationality diversities, but also competences diversities. So also kinds of profiles we want to bring in into our student population, but also into our faculty population. So for me, gender is a very important, obviously. So it's a very important target, gender parity. It should become, as I said, a natural parity. But I see, the diversity challenges in the broad sense of the term going beyond that. And if I may finish on something that, on this particular question, if I may finish on something that I underscored in the text I wrote for the Diversity Month, I think that beyond the importance of acknowledging diversity, what we also want to move towards is what I use the term that Edouard Glissant uses, which is the notion of wandering. The notion of wandering, which is, beyond diversity. What is diversity there for? What is it for? Diversity is for us to learn from each other. It's for us to learn from our diversities. If it's just about us staying in our own little bubbles, diverse bubbles next to each other, and making care, taking care that we have, the same numbers of people in each bubble, then I don't think we're, winning a lot from this. I don't think we are gaining a lot from this. So our objective should be, how do we open those bubbles? How do we make them exchange with each other? How do we reconstruct a community that learns from wandering around, going from one bubble to the other, and taking and building, reconstructing something new from this multi-diversity? And this is a very dynamic process. It should never become static in the sense of, bubbles next to each other. So that's what I'm very worried about, keeping the right dynamics in our work towards diversity, and not enclosing ourselves or re-enclosing ourselves through our work on diversity. And that's not so easy to keep that balance, because obviously sometimes you need protection. You need groups want to have the protection for the specificities, and they feel that if you open too much, they might lose their own identity, or they might actually be taken over, or whatever. And so, and we know that about gender in particular, but it's true for other diversities. But how do we keep this? How do we keep that dynamic, which is the only reason why we would want to have diversity, is to have that dynamic. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. If diversity is just there not to talk to each other, then it doesn't really make any sense.
Thank you. So dynamic diversity, that seems like quite a fantastic theme to end this podcast on. We've even gone over time with this interesting discussion, and we'd like to thank you so much for your time and input. And Shubhangi?
This was an unbelievable conversation to have with you. Thank you so much for sharing it. And we at PDC are so glad to have you in conversation with us. I've been Shubhangi, this is Alex, and that's the team with PDC.
Thank you very much to the two of you. Thank you all, and have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.